The first tremor came without warning, a deep rumble that shook the foundations of every city. Across the globe, millions of people paused, sensing an uneasy shift in the air. It wasn't an earthquake. There was something more ominous about it, something they couldn't explain. Then, without any further signal, the sky exploded with a blinding flash. Massive ships, darker than the stars, descended from the heavens. They were colossal, alien, and terrifying. Earth's satellite systems failed in an instant, as if the invaders knew exactly how to cripple human technology. Communication lines cut, and the military scrambled to mount a defense, but it was hopeless. The ships hovered above every major city, casting enormous shadows across the land. Each ship unleashed a barrage of energy that obliterated entire buildings in seconds. People screamed as their homes, their lives, vanished into the air. The invaders, what the military would later call the Draxan, had no interest in diplomacy or warning. They landed in the heart of every nation's capital and began their assault without hesitation. There were no negotiations, no demands, just overwhelming force. It was clear they weren't here to make peace. They were here to conquer. In the midst of the chaos, government leaders fled, abandoning their people. Military defenses fell quickly, one after another. A few pockets of resistance held out longer, but the Draxans' superior technology made them nearly unstoppable. Those who survived the initial wave of destruction were left to witness the aftermath of a world plunged into darkness. The global order collapsed, and what remained of human civilization scattered like dust in the wind. In the ruins of what was once a thriving metropolis, a small group of survivors gathered in secret. They were a mix of soldiers, scientists, and civilians who had managed to evade capture or death in the early days of the invasion. Their leader, Captain Raina Foster, had once commanded a defense unit before the world collapsed. Now, she was leading the last hope of humanity, a ragtag band of survivors hiding beneath the wreckage of an old underground city. The place had been forgotten by the rest of the world, hidden beneath layers of history and time. They called it the Vault. Buried deep under the rubble of a city lost to ancient wars, it was a facility no one had visited for centuries. That is, until they stumbled upon it by accident while searching for resources. It was an old bunker, thought to be a relic of a long-dead civilization, but inside, something strange lay dormant. Inside the vault, they found artifacts, strange, unrecognizable devices. Among them was one particular object that stood out, a massive, crystalline structure, pulsing with an unearthly light. At first, no one understood what it was. The survivors could barely make sense of the language or symbols engraved on its surface, but it radiated power. As Captain Foster stood before it, her heart raced, sensing that this object held something vital, something humanity needed if they were to survive. And then, as if it had been waiting for them all along, the beacon flared to life. Its glow intensified, filling the chamber with a bright, soothing warmth. Outside, the Draxan forces advanced, but for the first time since the invasion began, humanity had found something that might turn the tide. It wasn't just a weapon. It was something more. It was the hope they desperately needed, but what was it? And could it really save them from the dark invaders closing in? Foster stared at the beacon, realizing that this was their last chance. The world had been shattered, but perhaps, just perhaps, this artifact held the key to humanity's survival. Time was running out. The survivors watched in stunned silence as the beacon pulsed with energy. Its glow intensified, bathing the underground vault in a soft, otherworldly light. The air seemed to hum with power, and the oppressive weight of the Draxan invasion outside faded for a brief moment. Captain Raina Foster stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. She had seen weapons of unimaginable power during her military career, but nothing had ever felt like this. "What is it?" A voice asked from behind her. It was Dr. Elara West, a scientist and one of the few experts still alive who had the knowledge to understand ancient technologies. She was studying the intricate symbols on the beacon's surface, tracing her fingers along the lines as if trying to decode them. "I don't know," Foster said, her voice tight, "but it's our only chance." The group had barely started to examine the object when they heard a loud explosion in the distance. One of the Draxan ships had landed nearby. The ground trembled with the force of their arrival, and the survivors exchanged anxious glances. They knew the Draxan wouldn't stop until they found and destroyed every last human. As the ground shook beneath them, the beacon began to vibrate, its glow now almost blinding. A sharp, high-pitched tone filled the air, rising in intensity. For a moment, it felt as if the world itself was on the brink of shattering. Then, with a sudden surge of energy, the beacon sent out a brilliant beam of light that shot up through the ceiling, piercing the layers of rubble above them. The survivors gasped in awe and fear as the ground around them cracked, and the cavernous room began to tremble. "What is it doing?" whispered Sergeant Kai Torres, one of Foster's trusted lieutenants. Before anyone could respond, a sudden voice broke the silence, echoing in their minds. It wasn't a sound in the traditional sense, but a direct transmission, clear and cold, like a thought shared without speaking. "This is your last chance." The voice was neither human nor alien, yet it resonated deep within their consciousness, something primal. It wasn't threatening, but the message was unmistakable. The beacon was speaking to them. It wasn't just an object, it was a vessel of knowledge, perhaps even intelligence itself. Dr. West took a step back, her eyes wide with astonishment. "The language, it's not any human tongue, but it's somehow familiar," she said, almost to herself. The beacon's energy began to settle, but the glow remained strong, almost steady now, as if it were waiting for something. Foster stared at it, her mind racing. The voice was clear, but there was no time for contemplation. They were in imminent danger, and the Draxan could not be allowed to discover their hiding place. "Move it," Foster ordered, her voice sharp and decisive. "We need to get out of here. The Draxan are closing in." As the survivors hurried to gather their things and move towards the hidden exit, the beacon suddenly shifted, its crystal structure rippling. A soft hum filled the air, and then, as if responding to the human presence, the beacon shifted its form, its once smooth surface now projecting intricate holograms, each showing images of a forgotten civilization. "It's showing us something," Dr. West muttered, her voice filled with awe. This is a map of the stars." The images flickered rapidly, displaying a vast network of star systems, some known to humanity and others completely unfamiliar. Each star was marked by a symbol that seemed to glow in rhythm with the beacon's pulse. It was a map, but not just any map. It was a guide to something. What? They didn't yet know, but the implications were staggering. Foster's thoughts raced. This wasn't just a weapon. It was a tool of knowledge, perhaps the key to defeating the Draxan and understanding the mysteries of the universe itself. But time was running out. The Draxan were getting closer, and the survivors had no idea what the beacon's awakening truly meant. Was this a gift from an ancient civilization, or a warning? And most pressing of all, what would the Draxan do when they realized the humans had found it? As the first sounds of alien footsteps reverberated through the tunnels, Foster made a decision. They would follow the beacon. Whatever it was leading them to, it was humanity's only chance to survive, and perhaps even to turn the tide in the war against the Draxan. The survivors moved quickly, their footsteps echoing in the narrow underground passages as the distant sounds of Draxan troops grew louder. Captain Raina Foster led them with focused determination, her mind on the beacon and its cryptic message. They had no time to waste. The Draxan were closing in, and the only advantage they had now was the beacon's mysterious power, which still pulsed with an intensity that suggested it could do more than just guide them. Dr. Elara West and Sergeant Kai Torres were among the last to leave the vault, ensuring that nothing important was left behind. The beacon, still radiating a faint blue glow, was carefully packed into a transport case, its significance now more evident than ever. It wasn't just a relic, it was humanity's lifeline, and if they were going to survive, they needed to harness whatever power it held. They made their way through the ruined city streets, moving in the shadows to avoid detection. The once bustling metropolis now lay in ruins, its skeletal remains a testament to the ferocity of the Draxan assault. The alien forces had left no corner untouched, leveling entire districts with ease. It was a stark reminder of the grim reality they were facing. When they finally reached the outskirts of the city, they joined up with other survivors, scattered remnants of the human resistance. The group was small, barely 100 strong, but their spirit had not been broken. They had seen their homes fall, their families lost, but they were still here, still fighting. "This is it," Foster said as they regrouped in an abandoned building. "We hold this position until we figure out what the beacon can do for us. We can't afford to be reckless, but we can't afford to sit and wait either." Dr. West began examining the beacon once more, her fingers moving over the surface, trying to decode the symbols that now seemed to pulse with a rhythm of their own. The beacon was responding to her touch, each movement sparking a small burst of energy, as if it were coming to life under their hands. "We need to activate it properly," West said, her voice filled with urgency. "I think it's ready, but we need to be cautious. It's more than just a weapon. It's an amplifier, a tool that channels human willpower." Foster nodded. She understood what that meant. The beacon could turn their fear, their rage, their hopes into something tangible, something powerful. But it was also unpredictable. The very emotions that fueled them could just as easily lead them to their doom. Before they could make a decision, the ground shook. Draxan forces had entered the city perimeter. The survivors were out of time. "We don't have a choice," Foster said, turning to the group. "We activate it now." The resistance fighters took their positions, preparing for the worst. They fortified the building's entrances and waited in tense silence. The sound of alien footsteps drew closer, and the faint hiss of the Draxan's advanced weaponry crackled through the air. The enemy was upon them. Dr. West worked quickly, inputting commands into the beacon's interface, her fingers flying across the symbols. There was a brief moment of hesitation as the room fell deathly quiet. Then, with a final press, the beacon activated. The entire building shuddered as the energy field erupted from the device. A pulse of blue light surged through the walls, radiating outward like a shockwave. In an instant, the Draxan troops outside were thrown back, their bodies crashing against the rubble of the ruined city. They scrambled to regain their footing, but the blast had been too powerful, disorienting them and causing them to lose their momentum. The humans, too, felt the surge of energy, but instead of fear, it filled them with an intense clarity, a focus they had never experienced before. Their senses heightened, their reflexes sharpened, and their resolve solidified. The beacon had unlocked something deep within them, a collective willpower that they had never known possible. As the Draxan regrouped and launched a counterattack, the resistance met them with newfound strength. Each human fighter, now empowered by the beacon's energy, moved with precision and efficiency. They fought as one, instinctively coordinating their movements, anticipating the enemy's every move. It wasn't just technology that had changed the tide, it was something far more fundamental. The beacon had awakened the full potential of humanity's mind, turning them into a unified force, capable of facing the invaders head-on. For the first time since the Draxan invasion began, the humans had the upper hand. The battle was hard-fought, but the Draxan, disoriented and unprepared for such a response, were driven back. The resistance had won their first victory. It was small, but it was enough to ignite the spark of hope that had been dimming for so long, and for the first time, they believed they could push the invaders back. But Foster knew this was only the beginning. The Draxen would not give up easily. The beacon had given them power, but it was only a taste of what was to come. The real fight was just beginning. The initial victory had given the survivors a sense of hope they hadn't felt in weeks. The Draxen were not invincible. They had proven that. The power the beacon had unleashed was more than just a tool for survival. It had made them stronger, faster, more efficient in ways they could never have imagined. But as the resistance celebrated their hard-won success, a creeping unease began to take root among the group. They had been granted power, but at what cost? Captain Reyna Foster noticed it first. The beacon's influence wasn't just physical, it was psychological. As she walked through the makeshift camp, she saw the difference in the eyes of her comrades. Their movements were more purposeful, their expressions more intense, but there was something else, something darker. The flickers of doubt that had once plagued their minds were gone, replaced by a fervor that bordered on obsession. The beacon, it seemed, was feeding on their emotions, amplifying their thoughts, their desires, and their fears, and the more they relied on it, the more it seemed to change them. Foster had witnessed firsthand how the Resistance's focus had sharpened after the activation. Soldiers who had once hesitated in battle now struck with lethal precision, and the civilians who had been afraid to fight now joined the front lines without question. The beacon had turned them into warriors, but it was also blurring the lines between self-control and madness. Dr. Elara West, who had spent days trying to understand the beacon's intricate mechanisms, was the next to notice the shift. She had once been a calm, measured woman, focused solely on her research, but now she found herself driven by an insatiable need to uncover more secrets about the beacon. It consumed her every thought, and the more she discovered, the more her obsession deepened. "It's not just enhancing our abilities," she admitted to Foster one evening, her voice tinged with a strange, almost manic intensity. "It's changing us on a fundamental level. The beacon is. It's fusing with our minds. We're becoming a collective, an entity, not just individuals anymore." Foster nodded grimly. She had sensed it too. The Resistance was becoming something different, something greater, but also more dangerous. The unity the beacon had brought them was no longer just a weapon against the Draxen. It was starting to erode their individuality, their sense of self. The change wasn't limited to the scientists or the soldiers. Sergeant Kai Torres, who had always been a reliable, steady presence, began to show signs of the beacon's growing influence. His temper had always been short, but now it was unpredictable, violent. He would snap at others over the smallest disagreements, his face twisted in frustration. The calm, composed soldier who had once been the voice of reason had become erratic, unable to control his anger. And it wasn't just him. Others began to exhibit similar traits. The slightest provocation could send them into fits of rage, their emotions running high and uncontrollable. Foster watched as their once unified force began to fragment. The energy the beacon had unlocked in them was a double-edged sword. While it gave them strength, it also threatened to consume them from within. Their minds, once sharp and focused, were becoming clouded with fury, fear, and an overwhelming sense of purpose that left no room for doubt. They were becoming a force to be reckoned with, but at the cost of their very humanity. As the Draxen regrouped and prepared for their next assault, the survivors had no choice but to press on. The beacon had given them power, and they would need it if they were to survive. But Foster couldn't shake the growing dread that this power would destroy them just as surely as it had saved them. "We're walking a fine line," she said to Dr. West as they stood in the command tent, watching the distant fires burning in the sky. "If we keep using this thing, we won't be human anymore. We'll be something else, something the Draxen will never fear, but something we might not recognize." West didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stared at the beacon, which lay quietly in its case, its light pulsing rhythmically as if it were waiting for something. The silence between them was thick with unspoken understanding. They had no choice but to continue, but they both knew that the beacon's power was not a gift. It was a curse. and unless they could learn to control it, it would eventually consume them all. The first signs of the Draxons' retaliation came just before dawn. The air seemed to vibrate with the hum of alien technology as the ground trembled beneath the survivors' feet. The temporary calm they had enjoyed after their victory was shattered in an instant. Captain Raina Foster gathered her forces quickly, her mind still racing from the events of the past days. The power of the beacon had changed them all, but now they would face a reckoning. The Draxon were not going to sit idly by after their first defeat. "They've found us," Foster said, her voice low but steady as she surveyed the horizon. The familiar glow of Draxon ships appeared in the sky, descending like dark stars to wreak havoc on the world below. A sense of dread washed over the survivors, but Foster knew that they couldn't afford to show weakness. They had to fight. Within moments, the survivors scrambled to their positions, preparing for the onslaught. The Resistance had no illusions about their chances. They had gained strength from the beacon, but the Draxon had the advantage of numbers and technology. Yet, for the first time, they felt something else, a sense of unity and purpose that went beyond mere survival. "We hold this position," Foster commanded, her voice cutting through the fear. "We fight until we can't fight anymore. We stand together, or we fall." Dr. Elara West, her face pale but determined, moved to the center of the camp, standing near the beacon. The device was once again glowing softly, its pulse steady, as if aware of the battle that was about to unfold. The scientists and engineers had been working tirelessly to understand how the beacon's power could be used more strategically, but time was running out. They had no more answers, only the raw energy of the artifact to guide them. The Draxons' first wave came in hard and fast. Their ships descended to the ground with terrifying precision, unleashing barrages of plasma fire that tore through the defenses the humans had hastily erected. The first wave of Draxon warriors, clad in advanced armor, stormed the battlefield with ruthless efficiency. The air crackled with the sounds of gunfire and explosions as the two forces collided. For the first time, the humans fought without hesitation. The beacon's power surged within them, amplifying their strength and coordination. Sergeant Kai Torres, his once unpredictable temper now tempered by the beacon's influence, led the charge. He fought with a ferocity that seemed beyond human, his movements calculated but wild, each strike landing with the power of a battering ram. The soldiers, their senses heightened, worked in perfect unison, anticipating each Draxon move with an eerie precision. But the Draxon were relentless. Despite the human resistance's newfound strength, the alien invaders showed no sign of slowing down. They adapted quickly, countering the human tactics with cold, calculated responses. Their technology was far superior, their weapons more advanced, and they fought with a single-minded determination to eradicate humanity. Foster fought alongside her troops, her mind focused on survival and strategy. Every instinct told her to press forward, to take the fight to the Draxon, and show them that humanity was not easily defeated. But she knew the longer they fought, the more the beacon's power would consume them. She could see it in their eyes, the manic energy, the frenzy building with every passing second. As the battle raged on, a new wave of Draxon reinforcements arrived. They came in greater numbers, their ships filling the sky, and the ground beneath the survivors began to shake with the force of the alien assault. The humans had no way of knowing how many more were on the way. The Draxon's fury was unmatched, and it was clear they intended to wipe out the last remnants of humanity. In the heat of the battle, Dr. West's voice suddenly rang out over the comms. "Captain, the beacon, it's amplifying our emotions too much. We can't keep this up for long." Foster's heart raced as she looked around. The soldiers were losing themselves in the energy. Their fighting had become reckless, fueled by an uncontrollable rage that made them more dangerous but less effective. The beacon had given them power, but at a cost. They were not fighting with the clarity they needed. They were fighting with blind fury. "We need to fall back." Foster ordered, but the words barely reached the ears of her soldiers. The Draxen were pressing in from all sides, their forces overwhelming the humans with sheer numbers. As the first casualties began to fall, the survivors realized they were facing more than just an invasion. They were fighting against their own humanity. Foster made a split-second decision. They had to retreat and regroup, or this battle would become their last. The beacon's power had brought them a victory once, but if they didn't regain control, it would be their undoing. The Draxen would show no mercy, and neither could they. The decision to retreat was a bitter one, but Captain Raina Foster knew it was the only option. The battlefield had become chaos. The Draxen were everywhere, their forces overwhelming and relentless. Despite the beacon's power coursing through their veins, the survivors were being slowly pushed back. The soldiers' heightened aggression, fueled by the beacon's influence, had turned their once precise tactics into reckless abandon. They were losing control, and that was something they couldn't afford. Foster's mind raced as she issued orders for a retreat to the last secure location they had, an old underground military bunker on the outskirts of the city. The soldiers began to pull back in disarray, dragging the wounded and falling behind as the Draxen closed in. The air was thick with the sounds of battle, plasma fire streaking through the sky, the screams of fallen soldiers, and the unyielding roar of Draxen warships overhead. "Fall back, now," Foster shouted as she helped cover the retreat, picking off Draxen soldiers with cold efficiency. Her eyes darted between her comrades, trying to maintain some semblance of order amidst the chaos. She saw the fear in their faces, their fear not just of the enemy, but of the beacon's growing influence on them. The lines between control and madness were blurring, and the tension was becoming unbearable. Dr. Elara West was among the last to retreat, her hands shaking as she clutched the beacon tightly. She had been studying it feverishly, but now she seemed more withdrawn, her eyes distant as if she were no longer fully present. Her obsession with the artifact was consuming her, and Foster feared that soon, even she might lose herself entirely. As the survivors reached the safety of the underground bunker, the mood was somber. The soldiers collapsed, breathing heavily as the doors sealed behind them. The last of the Draxen forces were still a few miles out, but the humans had bought themselves a brief respite. The bunker, designed for emergencies just like this, was a hidden fortress, stocked with supplies and equipped with enough defense systems to hold off a siege. But that comfort was fleeting. Foster knew that as long as the beacon remained in their possession, they were walking a dangerous line. The power it gave them was undeniable, but so were its side effects. The soldiers were no longer the same. They were less human, more driven by a force they didn't fully understand. And now, as the adrenaline of battle faded, the weight of what they had become began to settle in. Dr. West stood in the center of the room, her face pale and her eyes wide, as if still entranced by the beacon's glow. "It's not just amplifying our emotions," she muttered, her voice strained. "It's merging us. The more we use it, the more we become connected. We're starting to think as one, not as individuals. It's like the beacon is becoming part of us, and we can't escape it." Foster approached her cautiously. She had seen the change in West, how the once calm and analytical scientist had grown more erratic and obsessive. "Elara, we need to understand this, not let it control us. You're not the only one who feels it. We're all changing." West looked up at Foster, her expression hollow. "I don't think we can control it anymore. It's too powerful. It's not just a weapon. It's an intelligence, and it wants us to become something else, something more." Foster's stomach twisted with the realization. The beacon wasn't just an artifact of power, it was a force of transformation. The Draxen were right to fear it, but they had never imagined that humanity would embrace it, let alone be driven by it. The turning point had come. The beacon had given them strength, but at the cost of their humanity. And if they couldn't find a way to control it, they risked becoming something unrecognizable. The The survivors had a brief moment of respite, but their greatest challenge lay ahead, not in defeating the Draxen, but in surviving the consequences of their newfound power. Time was running out, and they needed to decide whether the beacon was a gift or a curse. If they couldn't regain control, they would no longer be fighting for survival. They would be fighting to preserve what little of themselves remained. The days in the underground bunker were heavy with silence and uncertainty. The power of the beacon still pulsed through the survivors, but now, instead of feeling invigorated by it, they were overwhelmed. The change in them was undeniable. It wasn't just their minds that had been altered, their bodies had become stronger, faster, more efficient. But with every passing hour, the line between self-control and the beacon's influence grew thinner. The resistance fighters, once individuals with distinct personalities and memories, were beginning to act as one unified consciousness, less human, more something else. Captain Raina Foster stood before the group, her gaze sweeping over the soldiers and civilians who had followed her through the worst of the war. They were no longer the same people who had stood by her side when the Draxen first arrived. But despite the changes, the urgency of the situation was clear. The survivors nodded grimly, but Foster could see the distant look in their eyes. They were no longer individuals, they had become a collective. Some part of them still clung to the desire for victory, but it was becoming harder to discern where the beacon's influence ended and their own will began. Dr. Elara West stood by the beacon, her hands trembling as she studied its pulsating surface. She had stopped speaking to anyone unless absolutely necessary. Her obsession with the artifact had reached a new level. "It's ready," she whispered, her voice distant. "We can activate it. We can end this, but we might not be the same when it's over." Foster turned to her. "What do you mean?" West looked up, her eyes wild, as if she were speaking not just to Foster, but to something beyond her. "The beacon, it's not just amplifying us anymore. It's beginning to merge us into a single entity. It will bring us victory, but at what cost? I can feel it pulling at me, and I'm not sure we'll be able to break free once it's unleashed." Foster's stomach churned. She had already seen the toll the beacon had taken on them, seen the way it made their emotions flare and their minds cloud with an obsessive need to fight. But if West was right, unleashing its full power would change them irrevocably. They wouldn't be human anymore. They would be something else, something fused with the beacon's energy. "We don't have a choice," Foster said, her voice resolute. "The Draxen are coming. We fight, or we die." The survivors gathered for their final stand, positioning themselves in the fortress-like perimeter they had built. The Draxen fleet loomed on the horizon, their ships descending in waves, dark shapes against the violet sky. The survivors knew this would be their last chance to push back the invaders. The beacon was activated once again, this time with a force that shook the very ground beneath them. The energy field surged outward, covering the battlefield in a brilliant blue light. As the wave of power spread, the survivors felt their minds sharpen, their senses heightened. They no longer thought as individuals, but as one, unified, unstoppable, a singular force of will. Their bodies moved in perfect harmony, each person anticipating the next action without a word spoken. The Draxen advanced, their forces relentless, their warships firing powerful blasts at the humans, but the survivors were ready. With the full power of the beacon at their command, they fought with an intensity that was terrifying. Every movement was calculated, every strike precise. The Draxen struggled to keep up, their advanced technology and numbers no match for the humans' newfound strength. But the Draxen weren't done yet. They launched their most powerful weapon, a devastating energy pulse meant to annihilate everything in its path. As the beam hurtled toward them, the humans raised their hands in unison, drawing on the beacon's energy to create a shield that shimmered in the air. The blast collided with the shield, sending shockwaves through the battlefield. The survivors staggered under the strain, but the shield held. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. There was nothing but the hum of the beacon and the storm of energy crackling in the air. Then, with a roar, the humans launched their final counterattack. The beacon, now fully integrated into their collective minds, amplified their emotions, fear, rage, hope, transforming it into raw power. The ground shook as they surged forward, overwhelming the Draxan forces with a fury they had never anticipated. The final confrontation was brutal, but it was clear: humanity had won. The Draxan were retreating, their forces broken and scattered. As the last of the alien ships disappeared into the sky, the survivors stood victorious, but not unchanged. Foster collapsed to her knees, the weight of what they had done crashing down on her. The beacon's energy still thrummed through her veins, and she could feel the pull of its power. The battle was over, but the real question remained: what would become of them now? Would they ever be able to reclaim their humanity, or have the beacon already taken that from them? The turning point had come. The final victory had been achieved, but at a cost. The price of power was steep, and the survivors were left to face a future that was as uncertain as the world they had saved. The aftermath of the final battle left the earth eerily still. The survivors stood among the wreckage of their victory, the once vibrant sky now stained with the marks of the Draxan's destruction. The beacon's glow had dimmed, but its power lingered, like a heartbeat within every human who had drawn from it. Raina Foster stood among them, her body battered, her mind exhausted, but still, there was a sense of relief. The Draxan were gone. Humanity had survived. The war was over. Yet, as Foster looked around at the faces of her comrades, she could not shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. The survivors were no longer individuals. They were something more, something less. Their unity, born of the beacon's influence, still held strong, but it was a cold unity. They shared thoughts, emotions, and an unspoken understanding of one another's actions, but their personal identities were slipping away, absorbed by the collective force they had become. The lines that separated each person's mind from another were blurring, and there was no turning back. Dr. Elara West stood apart from the others, her gaze fixed on the still glowing beacon. The artifact had changed everything. The power it had unlocked had saved them, but it had also stripped them of what it meant to be human. West's obsession with the beacon had only deepened after the battle, her once analytical mind now consumed with the knowledge that humanity was no longer what it had been. "It's over," she whispered, almost to herself. "We won, but we've lost so much more than we realized." Foster approached her, her expression unreadable. "Elara, we've saved the world. We've driven the Draxan off our planet. We've given humanity a chance to rebuild." West turned to her, her face pale. "But at what cost, Raina? Look at us. Look at what we've become. We're not the same anymore. We've merged with the beacon. It's part of us now. There's no going back. The power we wield is not human." Foster felt a chill run down her spine. She had known it for some time, but hearing it spoken aloud made it all the more real. The beacon had turned them into something that was no longer truly human. They had evolved, yes, but in a way that was unsettling. They had gained strength, intelligence, and unity beyond anything they had ever known, but in doing so, they had lost the essence of what it meant to be an individual. "I know," Foster said softly, "but we can't change what's been done. We have to move forward. We have a chance to rebuild. We're the last remnants of humanity. What we do now will determine the future." West looked at her, her eyes filled with sorrow. "We don't know what the future holds, not anymore." The survivors slowly gathered around, their expressions stoic, their movements almost mechanical. The collective mind they shared had made them efficient, but it had also stripped away the individuality that had once made each person unique. Yet, in this new world, they were all that remained. It was up to them to decide how to move forward, to rebuild a future that was now irrevocably altered. As Foster looked at the faces of her people, she knew that they had to chart a new course for humanity. The old world was gone, and in its place, A new society would rise, one that would be forged by the power of the beacon and the lessons they had learned in the fires of war. The survivors turned away from the battlefield, their minds connected, their actions deliberate. They had the strength to shape a new world, but it would not be the world they had known. Their future would be one of unity, yes, but also of uncertainty. The price of survival had been high, and the beacon had left its mark on them all. But as they moved forward, they carried with them the knowledge that they had faced the darkness and had emerged victorious. In the distance, the sun began to rise, casting its light over the ruined landscape. The world was scarred, but alive. Humanity had survived the Draxon's fury and the power of the beacon, and now they would find a new path forward, together, but forever changed. The dawn of a new age had arrived, but what it would bring, only time would tell.